There were some major developments this week in the effort to save the Buena Vista Mobile Home Park. It's contingent on a number of government agencies lending their support and approval, but this kind of comes after a year and a half of efforts by County Supervisor Joe Simitian, who's one of our guests today that I'd like to welcome, and also Winter Dellenbach, who's been a community activist in the Barron Park neighborhood and a big organizer of the efforts to try to preserve the park. So welcome and thank you both for being here. I think the place to start here is a brief synopsis of what it is that has led to this so-called breakthrough development. And Joe, you're probably the best person to just quickly summarize where we are here in terms of process.
Well, early on, we were able to get the County of Santa Clara to put $14.5 million of developer fees into the mix to try and preserve the Buena Vista and keep those 117 families in Palo Alto. The city stepped up almost right away and matched that amount, so we thought we had a good start. We found a nonprofit mobile home owner-operator whose work it is to preserve affordable mobile home park communities. Negotiations ensued, and then once the parties started suing one another, we just got stuck. And so you have a three-way litigation with the city, the residents, and the park owner himself. They're in state and federal court. Negotiations came to a standstill, and so my thinking was, all right, what can we do to sort of break that logjam, treat everybody fairly? And ultimately, in conversations with the Housing Authority, which is a separate legal entity, they said, this is consistent with our mission. We would be prepared to fund the gap in cost, if any, between what you've already raised and what the ultimate purchase price might be. And we're in the business of acquiring, owning, and operating affordable housing. So they are a new partner, and they bring two key ingredients. One is the additional funding that's needed, and the other is the ability and willingness to acquire the property.
There's a third key ingredient, which is the power of eminent domain, and that was a big topic in the press conference when you announced this new partnership. And I wanted to ask you about that because that's kind of one of the key components of the Housing Authority's entry into this partnership. There's been kind of a mixed reaction to the announcement, with some of our readers basically expressing surprise that eminent domain could potentially be used. And the property owners' lawyers called it an outrage, the possibility of eminent domain. So how would you respond to that particular component of
I think
power?
All of us hope that the Housing Authority will be able to negotiate a purchase and a sale. If they go beyond that and use the legal process, I think it's important to realize one of the things that guarantees is that the owner will receive full and fair market value. Everybody who's part of this conversation wants the owner to receive full and fair market value. I think we all think that's their entitlement. They have invested in this property for years and years. So if the Housing Authority and the owner end up in court rather than a negotiated settlement, one of the things that is guaranteed by that process is that the millions upon millions of dollars in profit to which the owner is entitled, in my view, are in fact identified and paid by the Housing Authority before there's any transfer. And ultimately, if it does get legal, they'll sort out in court what is or isn't lawful and appropriate. Again, my hope is that they'll find a way to negotiate a purchase without going that far down the road.
So the big change here really is that now there's the leverage is on the side of those who want to preserve the park, because the ultimate hammer here is the use of eminent domain, as Gennady has pointed out.
Well, the Housing Authority, one of the questions that came up is why didn't the city or the county go down this path? And the obvious answer, which is obvious once you think about it, is neither the city nor the county are in the business of owning and operating affordable housing. That's what the Housing Authority exists to do. So for the city to acquire the park did not make sense. Palo Alto does not want to be in the mobile home park business. For the county to acquire the park did not make sense. The county doesn't want to be in the mobile home park business. But if we can both put our resources in, and I should emphasize, these are developer fees. We keep hearing folks talk about taxpayer dollars. These are developer fees that were paid by developers exclusively to be used to create affordable housing. So not only is this the appropriate use, it's the only appropriate use for the funding. If you take that funding plus the willingness and ability of the Housing Authority to own and operate the site after they acquire it, then it's really a match that I think is a good fit for the circumstances we face.
I don't want to lose the eminent domain topic because there are people that view eminent domain as a governmental taking of property, a seizure of property from a private landowner. And even with the explanation that fair market value would be agreed to be paid, if necessary, as determined by a court, there are a lot of people that think that it's just fundamentally wrong for private property to be involuntarily purchased, even at fair market value. Can you, Joe, you're an attorney, I know you're not an eminent domain attorney, and it's a complicated area of the law, but there are some pivotal court cases, and I'm wondering if you could just explain what is the rationale of eminent domain and how does it apply in this case?
Well, the first thing I should mention, there's a certain amount of irony here, which is that the lawyers for the property owner are in court suing the city of Palo Alto, alleging that the property was taken without just compensation because of the relocation allowances that are provided for in the city's closure decision.
Actually, let me just correct you there because they're actually being careful not to make the taking argument. The argument they're actually making is that the city exceeded its authority in extracting those payments to relocate the residents.
They may be making that argument.
Because they don't want to make the argument that it's a taking, because then you're going to have what's about to happen.
They may be making that argument legally, but they've certainly been making the argument that essentially the city's action is a taking of value from the
PR
property
standpoint, that's
without
the case thing.
without compensation. So if ultimately the housing authority goes down this path, the irony is there will be full and fair compensation, which is what the folks who are representing the owner have suggested they need. With respect to the legal process that the housing authority might or might not enter into, I think the fundamental question is there a public use? And is there a public benefit? And is the property being acquired by a public agency? And the answer is yes, yes, and yes. And as I understand it, and you're right, I'm not an eminent domain attorney, as I understand it, the process requires that they have a resolution of necessity. And I think when you look at the need for affordable housing in this area, and the fact that this is the last mobile home park in Palo Alto, if they go down that path, I think they're going to be on pretty solid ground. But ultimately, I think the last thing I would say is for folks who have some concern about the fairness or the equity, there are laws on the books. Obviously, the housing authority will have to comply with those laws. And if they're within bounds, they'll proceed. And if they're not, obviously they won't.
And so what financial risks does the city of Palo Alto, or for that matter, the county of Santa Clara, assume in heading in this direction of this three-way partnership?
Well, one of the things that's appealing about this three-way partnership, if we get the votes at the three levels of government here in the next few weeks, is that there is no additional risk. The two organizations have both said we can pull together $14.5 million in developer fees, but the agreement specifically says that's it. We are capping our contribution at that amount, and that's a maximum. So if it turned out it required fewer dollars, it would be fewer dollars. But that's a maximum. And the agreement specifically calls for indemnification, meaning that if there are additional costs going forward, that's on the housing authority. So city residents, county residents, I think can feel comfortable. There is no additional liability. There is no additional contribution. Every dollar of city and county funds that's going was paid by developers as developer fees for affordable housing. That's what the money was for.
So to be clear, if this devolves into a legal battle over the authority of the housing authority to use eminent domain, it'll be the housing authority that will defend its actions and pay the cost of litigation.
That's right.
Okay.
Of course, this isn't the first effort to try to kind of preserve Buena Vista. There's been other plans, including the one you mentioned involving Caritas that didn't work out. So I did want to ask Winter, I know she's been there from like day one, basically, since the closure process began. Given that it's been a bit of a roller coaster of emotions as far as, kind of hopes raised and not exactly realized for various reasons, I just wanted to get your sense of how big a deal is the latest partnership and whether you had a chance to speak to any of the Buena Vista residents, what their mood is like given this latest development.
Well, if I may just back up for 1 second about the eminent domain thing, I think also another way to think about this is that most of the people at Buena Vista own their homes. Mm-hmm. They are property owners. They have property rights, where is in part why those payments under both state and city laws are to be made. And that, in part, is why the Gissers have this federal suit in court, is over not wanting. They were claiming that that was a taking from the money that they have that are being required to pay for those, in part, homes being that the residents would lose if they were forced out of Buena Vista. And so if people are concerned about the land being lost in eminent domain, well, what about the homes being lost if people are forced out, if the Gissers, in fact, wouldn't have to give them anything for those lost homes? I mean, that is unfair, that is unjust, that is unethical. So people really have to, I think, get a grip here about what's going on. Many of those people will, in fact, become homeless if we don't manage to save Buena Vista. Now, to your question, how are Buena Vistans feeling about this? Oh, this is enormous. I went over to Buena Vista after the press conference the other day in City Hall. People are feeling pretty good. Now, there are a lot of people that don't understand what's going on. A lot of people, when I went over that afternoon, most people are at work. Were at work. But there were a few people around, and people were kind of coming out because the media was starting to show up. And they're going, what, why once again for the 100th time do we have people setting up cameras and video and wanting to, will you come talk to me? And so it was kind of starting to ripple through. And like, what? What is Joe doing now? And so it's starting to sink in that maybe after all of this time, for maybe the first time, that this may be for real.
Well, can I just interrupt and say, I appreciate the shout out for Winter, but what has been remarkable about this from day one is that almost everybody has pitched in. Yes, I know there are some dissenting voices, particularly anonymously and online. There always are. But the city stepped up right away when it had the opportunity to be a partner in this effort. The Housing Authority has stepped up. The 3 votes that we've had at the city and the county level have all been unanimous. We've had 24 Palo Alto mayors and council members, I think 12.5 school board members, including all 5 of the current ones. A rally with 500 folks at the city hall from every neighborhood in this town have stepped up to say, let's make this happen. And, I do read the online comments, and they can be pretty cranky. But there was one that really sort of struck me, and it was from one of the readers who said, there are times when you just conclude this is the right thing to do. And I think throughout the community, that is by far the predominant sentiment. And again, my thanks to everybody. Everywhere I have gone to ask for help, people have said this is a worthy effort and we want to help.
Of course, the next short-term step is, as was mentioned previously, 3 different government agencies have to vote on it. And how confident are you that that's going to happen? I mean, I know they put up money in the past, but this is a slightly new kind of turn of events given the introduction.
I'm reasonably optimistic. We've not had a chance to take this issue up at the Board of Supervisors in some time, but it'll come up on this coming Tuesday, and 5-member body, we need 3 votes. The last couple times when we voted on this in terms of funding, as I mentioned earlier, the vote has been unanimous. The city council members will have to vote on this a week later, a little less, and again, they've not had a chance to talk about this yet, but their previous votes in support of retention were unanimous, and based on their comments, at least at that time, I think we have reason to be unanimous.
The Housing Authority, though, that's the wild card. And
the Housing Authority is the new partner in all of this, and they seem, after 4 or 5 months of due diligence to date, very comfortable about bringing this to their board. Their president, the board president there, is a woman named Kathy Espinoza-Howard, used to work with the city of Palo Alto and the county of Santa Clara, so she knows the lay of the land quite well. She was at the press conference that we had to show her support personally as the president of the board, along with their professional staff. So, don't want to count your chickens before they're hatched. I think that's at least the best cliche I can come up with at the moment. But I'm not only hopeful, I'm optimistic.
Okay. And so the first step is $250,000 being approved for the Housing Authority to do is kind of due diligence appraisals. I wanted to ask about the timeline. How long do these things usually take, and how long does it take to kind of come up with a appraisal and kind of get the process going?
Hard for me to judge how long it will take the Housing Authority to go through the step, but it's certainly a matter of some months. Do I think it's 3 or 4 months, something in that vicinity? And then once they go through that exercise, they'll know, all right, what is the fair market value of the property? Are they prepared once and for all to make a decision that they'll fund the gap between what the city and the county has provided and the actual purchase price, if there is a gap? We don't know yet because they haven't done that appraisal. What would it entail in terms of management? I think their current thinking is that they want a nonprofit with expertise in the nonprofit or affordable mobile home park world to step up. Previously, Caritas, a nonprofit from down in Southern California, had indicated a willingness to serve in that role. But there'll have to be a new process now that the Housing Authority is involved. They'll go through their own request for proposals and hear from Caritas, I'm sure, but any others who are out there who might be interested if such groups are, in fact, out there.
Is there clarity on what an appraisal of this property will actually consider to be the development potential of the property? It seems to me that we have an awkward situation in terms of valuing this property because you've got an approval of the closure with a certain set of conditions that the current owner believes are onerous and excessive. So in an appraisal of this property, how does that figure into it? And how does the underlying zoning figure into it, and whether the use would be in perpetuity, mobile home park, or not? This seems like a very complicated appraisal that's going to have to be done.
I don't think so. And again, I'm not an appraiser, among the many things I'm not this morning. But there are standard appraisal principles. There are trained appraisers who are experienced in the field and who know our area and who know properties of this sort. They will come in and look at it based on what they think from an economic standpoint is highest and best use. So there's no concern, or should be no concern, that somehow it will be devalued by its current use or by the limitations of its current use. They'll look at the zoning, they'll look at comparable sales in the area, and they'll ask, all right, what does a parcel of 4 and 4.5 acres with this kind of zoning go for in Palo Alto? And ultimately they'll come up with a well-documented conclusion and something that probably a binder of several hundred pages that puts a fair market value on the property. And if they go down, meanwhile, I feel sure the owner is going to pursue his own estimate or appraisal to make sure that he has a sense of what's fair and appropriate for the property. And if there's a difference of opinion between the two, then that gets sorted out either through negotiation or ultimately in court.
But I guess my question has to do with the mobile home closure ordinance, because a purchaser theoretically in buying the property also buys the approval that the city has granted the current owner for the closure. So in assessing what this property is valued at for highest and best use, doesn't one have to factor in that in a free market purchase of this property, a buyer has to deal with the terms of the closure ordinance and the actions by the Palo Alto City Council?
Absolutely, but I think even more important or primary in the consideration is going to be the fact that there is zoning, multifamily zoning. I believe it's RM 15, maximum of 15 units per acre on the site. Important to underscore that's a maximum, and as we've seen in Palo Alto lately, the maximum doesn't seem to be used an awful lot in terms of ultimate decision making by the council. So they'll look at the market rate potential of the property with RM 15 zoning on it, and as you mentioned, with the limitations or costs associated with the relocation requirements that are currently on the property. Yeah.
Winter, I'm interested in exploring a little bit further the arc of this effort and its impact on the lives of the people that live in Buena Vista. There's been, I think one of the surprising things to me is how unified the residents appear to have been through this entire process, given that I suspect there are some that might view the relocation assistance as attractive enough to be desirable to exit, to take advantage of the relocation package as approved by the city of Palo Alto. Can you give us some of the texture of how this community has kind of remained unified in the face of all the ups and downs?
Sure. In fact, there may be a few people that will choose to leave. However, I think it is valuable to note something about the law in Palo Alto that pertains to Buena Vista, in that if you were a resident there, I believe, as of September 2012, when residents were issued a letter by the owners saying that I intend to close the mobile home park, it was either then or when the owner filed the application in November with the city to close the park, one of those 2 dates. If you were living there, if you were a legal resident there that owned your mobile home park, or you were a legal renter, then you were entitled to relocation payments. And you could move away, but you were still entitled to a proportional amount of relocation payments. And so people weren't necessarily bound to live there. They weren't, kind of imprisoned at Buena Vista. I only know of a handful of people that have chosen to leave, because remember, for the many, many families, there's about 70 families there, 70, well, actually, there are more than that, households there that have children. Their primary motivation for living at Buena Vista is to have their children in our schools. They're not going anywhere. There's no way. So people are planted, and they are unified. They are together. We know that human beings tend to unite when they feel a threat. And these people are further bound by, many of them live in extended families. And there's not going to be one or two households leave. They're families that, without hyperbole, these families have lived together from time immemorial. I don't know how long they've lived together, but they aren't going to break up. And also that community is very close as a whole. Many of them, perhaps not all of them, but many of them. So it is not surprising. I mean, now that I've gotten to know them over the years, but it is not surprising that they are this incredibly tight group of people. And that is one of the things that saved them, because their ability to come together almost instantaneously and organize. I have never seen such a thing before. I have been involved in so many efforts since the time I was 23 years old, and I have never seen anything like this. I mean, I think of things I was involved in my 20s, and it took us kind of a long time to get up steam. And these guys, it was like that. And they came to the city council. None of them they didn't know where City Hall was, let alone come to city council. And they were there, and they had organized this multi-part presentation that was divided along the lines by age, elders, disabled people, all of these college students, and made this presentation. And it was one of the best presentations I have yet to ever see in front of City Council.
I wonder if you could share how you got involved in this in the first place.
I was at City Council that night to speak for the first time about my concerns for Buena Vista being closed down. And we happened to run. I said, "Are you from Buena Vista?" When I walked in, I saw all these folks I'd never seen there before. And I met Erica Escalante, who has some gene that has never been discovered before that has organizer written on it. And they are remarkable. And I think I had a conversation with a parent when I was at Buena Vista after the press conference the other day. And we were talking, and I said, when your children are approaching filling out applications for college, I hope that your child and all the other children that have been involved in this almost four-year process will remember the ones that stood up, that spoke at school board meetings about Buena Vista, that spoke at city council, will put this on in their college essays. We'll figure out how to express this, their participation of defending their homes, defending their community, how they participated. A whole lot of them did, and they did it extremely well and effectively. And then they will never forget this. And a whole lot of these people are going to go on with their lives, and they will be defending themselves and defending other good things out in the world. And I'm just thrilled that I know these people. What good people.
And I also wanted to ask, I mean, while preserving the homes of the Buena Vista community is the overriding kind of goal, and another objective is to repair the homes and repair the mobile home park because it does have some pretty significant infrastructure issues, which Supervisor Simitian mentioned at the press conference. And you estimated it would cost like $10 million, $12 million.
The folks at Caritas, the nonprofit that we've been working with at the county, have done a pretty extensive site survey. They're in this world on a daily basis with 20 parks around the state that they own and operate. They've told me that it's probably a $10 to $12 million proposition. There's a lot of deferred maintenance there, and that's understandable. The owner did not plan to maintain the site as a mobile home park going forward, and so there's years and years of disinvestment in the property. I think that's going to be one of the key challenges if and when we're successful with all this. The other is that the units themselves, in many cases, need some help, and so it's why I'm pleased that Congresswoman Anna Eshoo and State Senator Jerry Hill and Assemblymember Rich Gordon have all stepped up and said, if and when you get this put together, we're prepared to be helpful. They're prepared to be helpful in terms of trying to identify state and federal sources. And there are programs that are designed for lower-income mobile homeowners to try and repair and renovate their coaches. So if, my view is if this works out as we hope, I think everybody can be a winner. You get 400 people who live at the Buena Vista who will continue to be in their homes and who will avoid eviction. You've got 117 units of desperately needed affordable housing that the city and the county will not lose. You've got a cap on the participation of the city and the county, so financially it makes sense for them. The Housing Authority acquires a great piece of property with 117 units of affordable housing in a place where, frankly, it's tough to do affordable housing. It stays affordable in perpetuity. The owner gets full and fair market value, avoids the cost and aggravation of litigation, avoids paying those relocation allowances that Bill referenced, and avoids the uncertainties of the approvals and entitlement process. That is truly a winner for all parties if we can just get to yes. And I'm hopeful that 6 months to a year from now, you'll be sitting here talking about that win-win-win-win.
You must have known we were coming up against our 30-minute cutoff for this discussion because that was a great summary. Just to alert our viewers to what the next couple steps are. Next Tuesday, the County Board of Supervisors will hold a hearing and make its own recommendations on this proposal. The following Monday, which is June 27th.
Because I got it wrong initially at the press conference the other day.
The Palo Alto City Council will be receiving this and voting on it. And then the following day, on Tuesday, June 28th, the Housing Authority Board of Commissioners will do likewise.
May I say something?
Yes, absolutely.
We really want supporters in the supervisors' chambers on the 21st. That's during the day at 11 a.m. We really need supporters in the Palo Alto City Council chambers at 7:45 p.m. And there's an online petition that we invite everyone to sign.
That was an unpaid
Yeah, I was
commercial
going to say, if I had known that's what you were going to say, I
I'm
would.
here to help.
Well, Supervisor Joe Simitian, Winter Dellenbach, thank you for joining us
Thank you.
today. It's been a busy week of news in Palo Alto. Keep up on paloaltoonline.com, and we will see you next week.